across 8,891 kilometers, stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific, lies the longest undefended border in the world. A line that has separated two nations, Canada and the United States, for more than 150 years. But what if one morning, that line simply vanished? What if Canada and the US became not neighbors, but one single country, 400 million people united under a single flag? It sounds impossible, maybe even absurd. Yet history has seen stranger unions: the merging of German states, the birth of the European Union, even the collapse of the Soviet Union into 15 new nations. Borders, after all, are not eternal. They are choices. So what would this choice mean? A superpower beyond imagination, or the destruction of two unique identities? This is the story of a hypothetical empire, the United States of North America. Before Canada was Canada, before the US declared independence, both lands were battlegrounds of empire. French voyageurs paddled rivers through what is now Quebec and Ontario, while British colonists expanded down the Atlantic seaboard. The War of 1812 was perhaps the first test. Americans invaded, Canadians resisted, and Britain fought to defend its northern colony. Out of that war, two identities hardened. The United States, young and ambitious, and Canada, cautious, protective, and tied to Britain. When Canada confederated in 1867, it did so partly to avoid being swallowed whole by its southern neighbor. For decades, annexation was whispered about in Washington and feared in Ottawa. And yet, despite this divide, both nations grew intertwined, allies in two world wars, partners in NATO, builders of the world's largest trading relationship. Still, identity remains the wall. Canadians pride themselves on healthcare, peacekeeping, and bilingual culture. Americans on individual freedom, military strength, and global dominance. Would a merger erase these distinctions, or finally prove they were never so different after all? Combine America's $25 trillion economy with Canada's $2 trillion, and you create an economic colossus larger than China or the European Union. Together, the US and Canada would control the largest reserves of fresh water on Earth, vast oil and gas fields in Alberta, Texas, and Alaska, Silicon Valley and Toronto's booming tech hubs, farmland stretching from Kansas to Saskatchewan, feeding hundreds of millions. The advantages are staggering. A single currency could eliminate trade friction. Energy security would be absolute. The new nation's industries, from aerospace in Montreal to Hollywood in California, would dominate global markets. But prosperity isn't just about size. Could Wall Street coexist with Canada's heavily regulated banking system? Would Alberta's oil sands find balance with America's push toward green energy? Could universal healthcare survive in a country where private insurance is a trillion-dollar industry? Economics is not only numbers, it's ideology. And merging two economic cultures might prove harder than merging two currencies. Militarily, the Union would be untouchable. The US already commands the largest defense budget in history. Add Canada's vast northern territory, its Arctic sovereignty, and its peacekeeping reputation, and you forge a global juggernaut. The United States of North America would stretch from the Caribbean to the Arctic, from the Pacific to the Atlantic. NATO, the UN, the G7, all would tremble at the sheer scale. But would the merger truly amplify Canada's voice, or simply silence it? For decades, Canada has played the role of middle power, the quiet diplomat, the peacekeeper. That role would vanish under the shadow of Washington. The world might not see Canada anymore, just a larger America. Culture is where the cracks would show. Canada is officially bilingual. The US is not. Quebec's French heritage, protected fiercely for centuries, could dissolve under a new majority. Policies differ sharply. Americans defend gun rights. Canadians regulate them strictly. Canadians expect universal health care. Americans fight over it bitterly. Would one half accept the other's values? Or would both dig in deeper, fracturing the new union? And beyond policy, there's identity. Canadians often define themselves by not being American. Remove that distinction, and what remains? Imagine Niagara Falls without customs booths, Vancouver and Seattle merged into one metro region, families no longer crossing borders because borders no longer exist. For ordinary people, the dream is freedom, free travel, free work, no passports. But the reality, legal systems rewritten, tax codes merged, ID documents replaced, a messy, confusing overhaul of daily life. Would Canadians be granted statehood like Texas and California? Or would their provinces remain provinces in a new hybrid system? The answer could decide whether citizens embrace unity or resist it. Now imagine governing 400 million people. The US runs a presidential system, Canada a parliamentary one. Which survives? Representation would be chaos. California already has more people than all of Canada combined. Would Ontarians and Quebecers accept being political minnows in a Congress dominated by US states? And what of Indigenous nations, whose treaties predate both Canada and the US? Would their sovereignty finally be recognized or buried under an even larger system? Democracy is fragile even within a single tradition. Blending two could be the greatest challenge of all. From above, it looks inevitable. One vast landmass, one people, one power. Together, Canada and the US could form the ultimate 21st century empire, unrivaled economy, unmatched military, a cultural machine spanning from Broadway to Banff. But the question isn't whether they could, it's whether they should. Would unity bring prosperity or erase the identities that make both nations unique? For now, the border remains, a line that divides but also defines. And perhaps that's the point. Sometimes the distance between us is what keeps us together. So what do you think? Should the border disappear, or is it the very thing that makes Canada and the US who they are?